legislation, say a few words, as well as Professor Andy Horowitz, who's the co-chair of one of the co-chairs of Regulate Rhode Island. So, but first, I just want to thank a few supporters here who are here with us today. So, first of all, Representative Aaron Regenberg, is he here or did he step out? He stepped out. He was here just a second ago. I think he'll be right back. Pat Ford from the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. Thank you so much for being here. Elizabeth Comrie from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Thank you so much for being here. Claire Pimentel, right here from Rhode Island Progressive Democrats. Rebecca McGoldrick from Protect Families First. Steve Brown and Hillary Davis from the Rhode Island American Civil Liberties Union. Melissa Bouchard from the Thomas Slater Center, Melissa, thank you for being here. Debbie Flipman from the Humanists of Rhode Island. I'm sorry, I keep getting mixed up where everyone is. Michelle McKenzie, who's a terrific public health researcher and recovery advocate, is here with us today. And we've also got students from URI and from Brown University who are part of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And thank you, Aaron, for being here as well. So with that, I'm going to let Professor Horowitz, who is a criminal defense attorney and law professor at Roger Williams, come up and say a few words about why this legislation that Representative Slater and Senator Miller as well, who's still in the Senate session, why this is such an important piece of legislation. Thank you, Professor Horowitz.
Thank you, Jared. As Jared said, my name is Andy Horowitz. I'm a law professor at Roger Williams University Law School. I run the criminal defense clinic at the law school and have been a practicing criminal defense attorney for over 30 years, and it's in that capacity as a private citizen, a concerned citizen, a co-chair of Regulate Rhode Island that I'm happy to be here today in support of this legislation. You know, an interesting development, Governor Raimondo recently introduced a proposal to impose taxes on people who cultivate marijuana for medical purposes and use it as medicine. That strikes me as an extraordinarily misguided approach. We have a very intelligent approach in front of us with this particular legislation, which provides for taxation of marijuana on those who choose to use it recreationally. That form of taxation makes perfect sense to me in the same way that we tax alcohol and cigarettes. Choosing to tax the use of medicine is really a novel approach, not an approach we see anywhere else. It strikes me as not only inappropriate, but really fundamentally cruel to people who need marijuana in order to medicate themselves for often very debilitating diseases. The legislation in front of us does something that to me makes perfect sense. It abandons what has clearly been a failed policy of prohibiting marijuana. The prohibition laws that we have in place siphon very limited law enforcement and criminal justice resources away from serious criminal behavior where we need those resources. Its enforcement is extraordinarily discriminatory, has always been, continues to be. It devastates communities of color, despite the fact that the evidence is compelling that marijuana use amongst all racial lines is really evenly distributed. It enforces an underground market in which children who have access to marijuana that is entirely unregulated, that is often contains dangerous elements in it, that requires our children to be interacting with people who are drug dealers, who have an incentive to put substances in the marijuana that may lead to a variety of other problems. Nothing in this legislation changes the concept that minors should not be using marijuana, will not be legally using marijuana. If you ask any high school student in the state, what's the easiest substance to get, marijuana, alcohol, or cigarettes, they will all tell you marijuana, without a doubt. Right? Why? Because we regulate intelligently and restrict access to cigarettes and alcohol in a way that we don't do with marijuana. This legislation would accomplish that. In addition, we are in an environment now, as the tax proposal makes clear, where we're looking to develop our environment and our tax resources. This legislation would do that very effectively. And if we don't act soon, we're going to lose the ability to foster our economic development in this state to our neighbors, most particularly Massachusetts. So for those and for many other reasons, I'm very happy to be here in support of this legislation.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Scott Slater, State Representative in District 10 in Providence, and I've been a legislator for about 7 years now. First of all, before I start, I'd like to thank everyone who showed up here today, everyone behind me who's a strong advocate and been working on this issue for a number of years. This will be the 5th year that I've submitted this legislation. Unfortunately, my colleague on the Senate, who's a great fighter for this issue and been a great advocate, and I'm proud to support this with them, is Senator Josh Miller, who would have been here today but is in the middle of a debate over there on the Senate side. So I'd like to thank first off Jared from Regulate Rhode Island for putting this together and for all the work he does on a regular basis. My colleague Aaron Regenberg, who's been a great partner and great advocate. So I thank you, Aaron, for being here. Last year I think I had over 30 co-sponsors on this legislation, and it was great to see many people in the House supporting this. And I'm still working on getting signatures this year. That's why I haven't submitted the bill at this time, but I will be next week. So, as I said, this is the 5th year that this legislation to legalize and regulate marijuana has been introduced in Rhode Island. For several years, many of my colleagues have supported this legislation. While some said we should wait and see, we have now had more than 2 years to see the results from other states like Colorado. And the results are in. And it's abundantly clear that regulating marijuana like alcohol works. Colorado's economy is doing very well from this. Tax revenue has exceeded projections, and the sky has not fallen as opponents have predicted. Dr. Larry Walk, the head of the Public Health Department in Colorado, said in December that there is no evidence that marijuana use among youth or adults has increased in Colorado as a result of regulating marijuana like alcohol. Our legislation was written with input from many of our legislative colleagues, as well as many members of the community, including health professionals, economists, and members of law enforcement. This bill represents a thorough, well-researched, and responsible system of regulating and taxing marijuana. You will find in this bill strong regulations for edible marijuana products, including requirements of childproof packing and strict labeling requirements, restrictions on advertising, and a sensible system of regulation, control, taxation on sale and production of marijuana for adult use. This legislation will bring tens of thousands of people who prefer marijuana over alcohol out of the shadows. It will erode the illicit underground marijuana market that creates problems in our communities. It will provide tens of millions of dollars in additional revenue for the state each year that will be invested in vital programs. And it will foster economic growth in our state and create many new employment opportunities for our citizens. This issue has been left on the table for far too long without receiving a vote. I urge my legislative colleagues to join me in supporting and ultimately passing this important piece of legislation this year. And I will say it's extremely important as we see what's developing throughout in many other states with marijuana and even in our New England states. Vermont recently, the governor over there put a proposal in his budget, Governor Shumlin. And as you see in Massachusetts, it's going to be on the ballot next year. So I think it's important that Rhode Island get in front of this issue and we take the lead, and there'll be much more benefits for us. I'd like to also thank Professor Andrew Horowitz for being here today and for his support on this issue. Stephen Brown from the ACLU, thank you for all your support. And everyone else that's here and been very supportive of this issue. It's time now. It's time that we pass this legislation, especially in the light of the new proposals that we've seen around the medical program of taxing the medical patients. I think, to tax people that need the marijuana for medicine doesn't make much sense to me. And especially when you have many adults that want to use this recreational, which would make much more sense to tax them. So thank you for your time today, and if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
You mentioned it's been introduced for 5 years now. Are there any significant differences in what you're introducing this year to last year's?
So, some of the specifics of the bill.
There are a few minor changes, nothing really dramatic. There is a license this year in the legislation that would allow for processors, so folks that can make edible marijuana products, infused marijuana products, without necessarily being a cultivator or a retailer. So this is sort of a niche that a product manufacturer could get this license. There was a slight change in the number of licenses made available for cultivators and retailers. The tax revenue earmarking, the allocation is going to now include 10% for localities and towns that have marijuana establishments in them. So to potentially encourage the residents of those towns to allow this, and to frankly also if there are any additional regulatory burdens for those towns to put some money back into those municipalities. I would say those are probably the major changes, but overall the basic structure is the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Professor, is there anything in this bill that addresses some of the concerns that law enforcement mentioned last year during the big hearing you had there?
Yeah. Well,
which concerns specifically?
Well, okay, specifically, it would be how do you determine and how could the police determine a toxicity level? For instance, with alcohol, they have a standard of like 0.08 or whatever. And how do we deal with that with marijuana?
I can take that if you want.
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Well, number one, the legislation last year and this year still includes an earmarking for money to go to law enforcement for drug recognition expertise training. So these are officers who receive special training to recognize drivers who are impaired. And this goes for marijuana, but also any intoxicating substance. So we've addressed that. It's also worth mentioning that in Colorado right now, they're actually doing a pilot test of an actual marijuana breathalyzer. And so that is being studied right now. And hopefully, very soon that will be a viable option as well.
Yeah. And one of the concerns that we had seen last year, some people brought up with the edibles, and there's strict controls in this bill as far as packaging, labeling, and making sure childproof packaging is part of that. And
it seems like for alcohol, we have empirical standards that, with respect to law enforcement, are fairly well accepted. I know sometimes it is challenge of breathalyzers and stuff like this, but there's a blood test, and it's pretty specific. And how do we deal with that with marijuana?
Well, I mean, the blood test or breath tests in drunk driving cases that relate to alcohol rely on statistical averages, right? So we have drawn a line at 0.08 as if to suggest that everybody who drives at 0.08 is incapable of safely operating a motor vehicle. That is simply not a fact. There are people who can drive at 0.08 and safely operate a motor vehicle. So there are problems even within the regime of the way in which we presently enforce drunk driving when somebody is under the influence of alcohol. What Jared said is correct. I've also read about the development of some tests that are in progress about trying to determine what somebody's level of impairment by marijuana is at a present moment in time. But ultimately, in prosecuting those cases, the important evidence is somebody incapable of safely operating a motor vehicle? And nothing about this legislation changes the police officer's ability to make those observations.
In addition to that, though, what I would like to say about that issue is, what are we doing now? So this is my issue, and this is one of the biggest things like I try to get around is, one of the big things that I can't get some of the opponents to see is, marijuana isn't something that we're introducing into society. It's not something that we're part. In Colorado, they have shown no additional use of marijuana. So the people that are using marijuana are going to still use it, and they're using it recreationally now. And why not get rid of the black market? And we've seen $1 billion worth of sales in Colorado. So even if there's a fifth of that in Rhode Island, and those sales are going to the black market right now. They're going to this illegal market. And where if you have kids that are going out there, believe me, they're not making sure there's a THC. They're not making sure anything's labeled. And no one's checking IDs. And the other issue is when they go to these dealers, maybe they get introduced to something else at that time. Whereas if you have a retail store that sells just marijuana to adults, you know that it's being regulated and that it's staying out of the hands of children.
This bill has been introduced, this is the 5th year, as I understand.
Correct.
Never made it out of committee before.
No, it has not made it out of committee.
What's your feeling about what the chances are this year? Do you have any sense that the leadership in the House, for example, is supportive of this and will actually help it get out of the...
Yeah, so my discussions with the leadership and with the speaker are that they're open-minded to this legislation. So he's given me no other indication but that he is open-minded and that he's willing to take it up and give it a fair hearing and hear from the advocates and the constituency and go from there.
You have to do this from the bottom up and gain traction and show the rest of the House that you indeed have the support.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's every year with legislation we have to do that. But over the years, I think it's been gaining momentum, and I think people are seeing on the horizon what's going on in other New England states, and even the officials in Massachusetts, some of them might not be in favor of it, but it's on the ballot over there, and they're going to have to deal with it one way or the other, because more than likely, this is something the voters want.
And if I could just jump in as well to speak on behalf of Senator Miller, who wasn't able to make this, but he has shared with me the list of co-sponsors and supporters of the legislation on the Senate side, and we're happy to say that we have more supporters than we did last year. Almost half of the chamber, about 17 sponsors so far, including the Majority Leader Ruggiero and the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator McCaffrey. So we do have support on the Senate side from the leadership there, and I think that Representative Slater is a powerful leader here in the House, and I think that bodes well for our optimism. Any other questions? No. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here and support. And anyone that needs a press release, come see me. I've got plenty of those.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you. Really great comments.